Welcome, Wargamers, back to the twisted madness and regal beauty of the Mortal Realms as we continue our discussion about the Flesh Eater Courts, the new faction that I am now obsessed with, and I'm taking you all with me. And today I wanted to kind of change the discourse, right? The first two conversations we had are one introducing the Flesh Eater Courts and kind of their mysterious background, how the origins have kind of been revised a little bit, nudged in different directions. And then we talked about kind of a greater meta-narrative, a conspiracy involving Neferata. But I want to change the kind of perspective that we're approaching this whole faction with and talk about what it's like on a day-to-day level. Like if you were a human who lived in the mortal realms, what would it be like to live next to a cannibal kingdom? What is it like to fight against something like this, right? To step into their land and be confronted with an enemy that's operating on a whole different reality. And so today we're going to take a look at those kingdoms from their aesthetic, their structure, basically everything you'd kind of want to know when you're writing a court of delusion of your own. One thing I'd like to say at the top of this video, if you are thinking about joining me on my med run for the Flesh Eater Courts, please consider using one of the links in my link tree down below. It lists out exactly how much money you'll save by using them, and every time you do, at no cost to you, a tip goes in my tip jar, and that goes directly to supporting me, my wife, our cats, the whole channel, and I'm so thankful for everyone who does. I know some of you did on Black Friday, and it just was a really special gift for my family, so thank you so much. And I also want to shout out Goonhammer, because as we talk about new battle tomes, you are going to want to learn how to play this kind of faction, and so head over to Goonhammer. I actually just chatted with some of the folks there. I'm hoping they're going to use some of the pictures of my models I painted for this set in their article, so go check them out, link down below. So let's start by kind of setting a baseline. What in general a Flesh Eater Court would look like. Now, of course, the various sub-factions and the way the realms affect them are going to change this, but we're, like I said, setting a baseline, you take your narrative however you want. But in general, these hold true. In any dark, forgotten corner of the realms, a court can grow. But to feed into their delusion a bit, you can often find them in the rubble of long-destroyed keeps, castles, villages, because in their mind, these are resplendent fortifications that are flush with food and safety. It has massive granaries, which are, of course, just dead bodies jammed into a tower. It has a thriving, forest-based economy of lumberjacks, which is just crypt horrors hacking at trees with their claws. And they, of course, celebrate the great culinary arts, which is, jamming random body parts together until something kind of tastes good. One of the early defining factors if you're writing lore for a court of your own is you have to decide if they're going to be mobile or if they're going to be stationary. So if they're stationary, again, they're going to likely find crypts and stuff like that because it's all about the Ghoul King's ego. All these things make him feel bigger and stronger. Or if, for example, like the Blister Skin are constantly on a religious crusade, so they're in perpetual motion, well then don't worry about the castle thing. No matter what their home looks like though, whether it's temporary or permanent, every inch of it is going to be covered in gore. Entrails, muscles, bones, all of it. Some of this is used in feasts and banquets. A lot of it's used as decor to feed into their delusion more and more. And then there's you. And we're going to take some liberties here, and we're going to assume that you are a totally sane and reasonable human being that has just been dropped into the mortal realms. Maybe you're helping a caravan or something. And a few things are going to start to happen as you approach the borders of a Flesh Eater Court kingdom. Let's take this caravan idea, right? Let's say there's like 8 or 9 of you just walking with some cattle that have stuff on their backs. You're going to start approaching weird things on the road, and you're going to start having discrepancies in what everybody sees. For example, someone might see a pile of dead bodies and go, oh my god, like there's a battle here, or something happened here, we need to investigate. Whereas someone else who's with them, wait, forget whatever you're looking at. Look up on top of this hill. Look at that amazing castle. Oh my gosh, it is so well fortified and maintained. We should go there and get their guard to come help investigate this murder you're talking about. And yet another person, a third person in that group might say, you mean that horrific pile of rubble up there? No, we should stay here among the orchards, pointing to the dead bodies. So none of you are having the same conversations. Your individual realities are starting to meld a little bit, And what you perceive is kind of flickering. Some of you may see the same thing. They might see the dead bodies. Others might disagree, but also agree on something else. Just by proximity of a flesh-eater court, your perceptions become utterly untrustworthy. Of course, both are true. There are dead bodies everywhere, and there is no nice castle, but they can't distinguish that internally. But let's say for our example here, again, we're taking us on our journey, let's say they all agree that the castle looks like a beacon of safety, and they start to press on directly towards it. Well, how is the kingdom that they approach set up? At the top is the aberrant Ghoul King. This is a male or female vampire who really is like the center of this court's universe. Everything revolves around them. Their delusions, their proclivities, the things that they like, they dislike, they fear, whatever it is. It's all going to trickle down. Immediately below them are a circle of vampires that share their blood. So as this court has been growing, when one person shows enough promise, they will bestow vampirism upon them. So they're still like below the Ghoul King, but they now are a significantly stronger creature, of course, than a mortal. This second tier of vampires can be sent out to, say, go take territories, lead war crusades, patrol like the borders, that kind of thing. But some of the vampires that we talk about here end up a bit more unstable and are often given like empty titles to placate them. And they give a great example of this of the Royal Flaymaster, which is essentially a very minor creature that is way too wild and irresponsible for anything in the court. So they're like, hey, go get busy and hang out with all the different monsters that we have in our realms and just get out of here. This is also where you'll see things like the Gore Warden, where it's clearly a vampire. It doesn't have like the sense of self to be able to like work with others. So they just kind of send these out as solo missions. Below that are the monarch's courtiers. These are barons, dukes, and duchesses that are picked to lead the armies of the king. And while they can all have crazy, long, ornate titles, a fair few of them seem somewhat universal. Baron Gizzard is usually a rank that is the first among a monarch's veteran flaymasters and monster hunters. Again, so I guess kind of like the equivalent of Neve Blacktalon is to Sigmar, right? A personal assassin, hunter, whatever. Marquis Gruelsop, the leader of the king's royal guard. Marrow Broth as a paladin or leader of the court's knightly orders. Marrow Scroll Heralds are warrior diplomats that work between kingdoms. That's one of the newer models we got. And the Gore Wardens, as I mentioned before, act as border protection and hunters. Now, there's no universal rules anymore to say, like, kind of what is what. The Gore Warden isn't a courtier in the similar sense, but he does serve a lesser role because he can't be given authority, like I was saying earlier. For your purposes, when it comes to you building your court and models and that kind of thing, aberrant, that keyword, or that word rather, is going to denote that they are vampires in general. So one of those is going to be your Ghoul King, the others could be his, the ones he's sired into his kingdom. Most of the courtier options in the book tend to be like serfs or knights, so below like the nobility, who are creatures that have drinking the vampire's blood, and that's what makes them mutate into big old crypt horrors and flayers and stuff, but they themselves are not vampires. And of course, below those courtiers are just the everyday, citizens. They could perceive themselves rather as men-at-arms or knights or whatever. And that's just all the other units kind of fill out the roster in that fashion. And all of those things that we just talked about are represented by battalion narrative war scrolls and these kinds of things. You can kind of get a better sense of what the outline is like there. But that is just a single kingdom. One of the things the last battle tome introduced was the idea of archregents. This idea that you could have one kind of supreme vampire in charge of lesser courts. They're not now independent cells, now they're getting unified. So now if you pick up an archregent model, he can be the guy who's in charge of your Ghoul King. And one thing that this latest battle tome kind of attached on, it didn't, I want to say like retconned or bolted on because it makes sense, but basically when we got the archregent, it was this idea that like authority can move upward beyond the Ghoul King, and it just continued, except now the high point is Ushurin. So archregents can be in charge of several courts, but they can still report to Usherin over in Giran. And what I like about this new book is it kind of helps fill in some of the gaps by adding him into kind of that chain of authority, because the bizarre consistency is explained by being based on a blueprint handed down by Usherin himself, right? The Mortarch of Delusion, back when he managed his own kingdom in the Age of Myth. So that was essentially the blueprint that he had of these knightly orders and all these things and all these different courtiers all vying for power and position, but doing so by strength of arms and like tests of metal, all these grand things. And so as his madness has disseminated throughout the realms, really, it carried that bit with it. His perception of what good things look like. That's very interesting to me. Now, of course, these parallels are super hard to see if you are an outside observer, even if you're immune to all like the mind-bending stuff. It's still just a bunch of like mutants all gaggling at each other, tearing apart dead bodies. And so our young explorers are walking into this castle. And by this point, let me just point out here, they're so close to the Ghoul King, he has likely already mentally consumed them. Like if you are in the proximity of one, they got you. So maybe what was flickering, distinctions between reality and delusion before is pretty much just now gone. Either they're hungry enough to just immediately run up and kill you and eat you, or you see a grand feast with a king at the head of the table, his royal court celebrating. You got serfs and knights celebrating the fruits of their labor together and welcoming these new arrivals to join them. And of course, the reality is this is just castle is near rubble, every inch is covered in gore. Instead of a table, there's just a long line of rotting human remains running up its length. All these creatures are hunched over, tearing at the meat with their hands, and growling at one another in a indecipherable language. Rather than being festooned with medals and trophies and honors, they have bones pierced into their skin. So that's kind of the thing I like when I talked about the delusion being consistent. When the Ghoul King awards a medal to a knight for, brave actions, going above and beyond the call of duty, in reality, he's still doing a thing. Like, he's piercing him with a bone. And that's like the miming motion that's all going on in their vision. So it's this weird consistency that I love. It's not like it just plays out in their head. You can see it on the models. And like I said, there's a great chance that our adventures here are going to end up on the menu instead of enjoying it. But likewise, they might accept his offer. And what we really get the sense of is you might catch glimpses of reality while you're near a Ghoul King, but once you eat the meat, there's something about ingesting it when it's been saturated with death magic. There's no coming back. Like, I'm sure at this point, before you take a bite, if some, say, Stormcast were to come in and then just immediately punk the Ghoul King and then all shuts down or whatever, I have absolutely no doubt that, like, your brain could come back from that. But once you eat that meat, you're done. Now, moving away from this specific example, what we're really seeing in these various units is just how much death magic or blood of a vampire has affected them. So when you and I partake of this grand feast and just kind of cozy up at the most safe, relaxing place in the entirety of the mortal realms, we would start likely as serfs. This is the lower class of society where you just kind of work as a hunter-gatherer. You're going out and you're just chopping wood, getting resources, tending to the flocks. Basic peasant day-to-day stuff, right? When the need arises, you are called to war, and on the battlefield, you can earn some real distinction, maybe even get yourself elevated. Because uniquely, these are medieval kingdoms that have upward mobility built in. Because as creatures become more corrupted, meaning, like I said, death magic, or of course, they could be rewarded for grand deeds by sipping a chalice of their master's blood, meaning his fine wine, they can start to change in size and their mutations can become more and more pronounced. And this is how we get units like the Horrors or the Flayers. Or actually even the new Morbeg Knights. They essentially feed the vampire's blood to bats, giant bats, and they turn into this like bat crypt horror mix. Eventually they'll grow to a point where they can be used as a courtier or something like that. And hey, if they hang in there long enough, they might be given the royal vampire kiss and be elevated to nobility. How changed your physical nature is reflects in the delusion. It's how people are elevated, they claim new titles, and so on. However, this is not to say that all flesh eater courts are the same, because this delusion is one that is highly flexible and adaptable. So this same premise will look different realm to realm, kingdom to kingdom. In Ghiran, bodies may hang from trees as like a dark parody of the Hanging Gardens of the Jade Kingdom. In Akshi, where resources are generally scarce, the Blister Skin Court is in perpetual motion on a holy crusade. And then you get into like what your particular Ghoul King favors. So some of them are going to favor the charge of knights. Others favor leaders atop glorious dragons, and then hordes of serfs rush forward, all praising him with, loyalty and all these kinds of things. And realistically, that's how you end up with sub-factions, is just, what does this faction look like in a different lens? I like to think that the overarching lore, like we just covered, introduces concepts, and then sub-factions are just an example of taking the core idea there and contextualizing it. So, like, what does that look like here and in this time? To that end, we have 4 sub-factions in the Flesh Eater Courts book, and the next 2 videos are going to be covering those. But I'm going to end this one like I end all my videos. Why is this cool? Like, the fundamental nature of a court. I'll be honest with you, I was never a King Arthur guy. I was not a Renaissance or medieval times dude, really. Love the restaurant and the game show, but not so much the actual period of history. But reading this made me want to stop what I was doing and learn about those things, because I was actually very curious as to what they're parodying. Like, how are they set up? What are the titles? What are they supposed to mean in terms of responsibility? And this faction is great because you can look at various historical settings, because, kingdoms and leadership structures and how kings take counsel has looked different, generation to generation to infinity. So you can kind of look at some of these historical setups and be like, I kind of like that. I kind of like this one where a king has like a trio of mystics that guide him, and then you can have your Gore Warden be one of those, a Ghoul King on foot, maybe another something else. Just like you can kind of make your own court however you want. So I think that's a win. And then there's something you don't like about history, whether it touches a subject that you don't particularly care to talk about or whatever, what's great is this is fantasy, and you can just have your delusion go in a different direction. Take what you want, leave what you don't. This book really does allow you to do pretty much whatever you want. It gives you like a precedent to set, and then it kind of gives you sub-factions that take that in very, very different directions, as you'll see. That story of the 2 adventurers stumbling upon a flesh eater court is actually, I kind of expanded it from a small section that is in the Battle Tome because I loved it. I love the idea that people might not be talking about the same thing, but there's no like sound, there's no boom, it just happens slowly. And what a strange barrier to communication, planning, or even your perception of safety that is. Because if you can't identify a threat, like, what do you do? I just thought that was super rad. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming.